I think actually the whole two name thing and the two different egos, that's more of me interpreting it, like looking back on it, I think, and naming some things and helping me. It's helped me like give a way of speaking about it that I think people can understand and really fit with my experience. So like while it was happening, I didn't feel like, oh, there's like Alan and Arlindu at war within me. That didn't really happen until like year 7.
So can you be specific about how, if we talked to Alan, we would see something different than if we talked to, what's the name again?
Arlindu.
Arlindu.
So Alan is going to look very American, and then Arlindu, the way that I speak, like in Makua or Portuguese, I use different intonation, I have different pacing. When I get excited, I talk really fast because that's how they like to talk really high. So there are different cues that we do that, and then even like body language is a part of that. Though I think actually body language is more core to our identity. Like, for example, in the Kumamoto, in the culture there, you shrug. When you shrug, that means you're saying no. Whereas in American culture, it's I don't know. And so that was very confusing at the beginning because I would be practicing my Makua and I'd say to some lady, so, how many kids do you have? And she would go, E. And I would be like, how can you not know how many children you have? And then we realized that it really means no. And so there are certain people, like I have a hard time, even my Arlindu side, I don't shrug to say no because the body language stuff is so difficult to change.
But you might eventually.
I may eventually, and there are some like breathing patterns that are different, like the way that people, like in American culture, if we were talking to somebody and we wanted to say, keep speaking, you kind of do the like you're giving cues that you're listening. In Makua, you go like this. And so that's the cue.
Like everything's a shock.
Yes, but it really just means keep going. And so sometimes when we like first landed, and this happened to me when we first landed in the States in May, I was talking to my brother, and Arlindu was the one who was apparently running the show, and he was talking, and I went, and my brother was like, "Are you okay?" He thought I was hyperventilating or something.
That's funny. Yeah. So when you're out during the day and you're using the Arlindu side's out interacting with the local people,
yes.
But then you're coming home, and the children they're not communicating like that. They're just using English.
Yes.
How's that switch work?
It's actually works pretty well. I mean, I think they see me being Arlindu enough that I think they see it as the same thing. But like people who knew me before going to Mozambique, who have come to visit us in Mozambique, have described how strange it is to be like, we're in a car driving out to a village speaking English, and then we get out of the car and act different. And it's like the codes have switched and I'm functioning in a different operating system, and that it can be a little bit unnerving.
Does it happen automatically? Like you don't need to turn it on, it just happens?
Yeah, it just happens. Yeah. But it is very challenging for me. I feel exhausted. The most exhausted I feel in Mozambique is when I have Americans with me out in a village, because I'm having to be both Alan and Arlindu at the same time. I'm having to explain things and listen and translate back and forth, and that's very taxing.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like 2 operating systems at the same time. Isn't that what you just said a minute ago?
And you kind of like overheat the circuits
yes.
when that happens.
Okay, so if you can describe a little bit about how the Mozambique people communicate differently than we do. Like you said, when they are, they speak higher when they're excited. Is that what you said?
Yeah, and like there's some different cues. Like if you want to say that something is really far away, you raise your voice, and so they use. Pacing is really important, and conversation is very slow. And the longer you can draw out a conversation, the better it is. And the longer I can tell a story and the more details I can pull in, the more people will like listen and listen and listen. And so it's challenging when I come back here and I have to pick up the pace in conversation and
Yeah.
get to the point faster.
Everyone's like that. Alan, he's a long storyteller.
Well, and so like that's part of it. Also, just like proximity. So if we were having this conversation in Mozambique, I would be sitting much closer, and especially with other men, I would be, we might be holding hands, we might be just leaning into each other, having a very close conversation. And when I come to the United States, I sometimes will back people across a room unintentionally.
Yeah.
And then I realize I have them like cornered, and it's very embarrassing.
So how much of that do you think that you incorporated consciously, or did it just happen as you became more proficient?
I think one thing that really helped us was doing an internship. Before we moved to Mozambique, I did an internship in Togo in West Africa, and I watched basically it was job shadowing missionaries who'd been there for 6 or 7 years, and they were amazing, and they had learned the language and they had learned the body language. And I specifically remember watching one of the missionaries crouch down in a way that was very African as he was crouching with other Africans. And that made a big impression on me. It made me want to really do a good job of mirroring body language. And so I think that experience very much helped. And I think the mirroring is a very good practice for kind of setting us on the course to becoming bicultural. Trying to match intonation, trying to match vocabulary. I feel like I'm always trying to learn new words and make sure I try out lots of words. Even in Makua, I'm still learning words, and so I'll just try them in a conversation. And my friends know to say like, "Oh, Alan, like you can't really use that word that way." And
Yeah, we call that hypothesis testing.
yes, well, and then I have a couple of friends who like they have taken it upon themselves to help me be better in Makua. And so whenever they see me, they will greet me in the most obscure way to just test me and to help me become more proficient. And so sometimes that's very annoying. But most of the time I'm thankful for it because being able to speak and communicate in Makua has opened so many doors.
Yeah.
Like it allows me to relate to people that I wouldn't normally give me a hearing if I was just speaking Portuguese or English.
So you're preaching there, right?
Yes, we do some preaching.
So I'm imagining when you're preaching, you're incorporating all of these things. Like if you're telling a gospel story or a Bible story, it's becoming this long,
Yes.
drawn out, detailed story.
Yes, and we one part of the culture that's very different